Hello and welcome, Crosstown Gamer here, and today we're going to be playing through Volume 2 in the Coin series by GMT, which is Cuba Libre. And we are going to be playing this as a solo game, and we're going to be using the non-player flowcharts, so we're going to be using the bots, rather than playing each faction individually. So, let's get into it and see where it takes us. And just as a side note, hopefully this is going to be the first in a longer series of games where I'll go through each of the coin games. I know there's a couple of missing volumes in there. Don't worry too much about that right now. They're on the way. But hopefully I will go through each of the coin games and I'll play with the bots on all of them so that people can get a better understanding of how the rules work, how coin games work, and how much fun these things can be, because they are a ton of fun. So, for Cuba Libre, let's take a look at what a coin game looks like and what we're looking at here before we actually get going on the playthrough portion of it. So, the game takes place in Cuba, and we have a map which is divided up into smaller provinces. So we have Sierra Maestra here, Oriente, Camagüey. These are all different distinct provinces on the map. Also, we have these large circles here, and these represent big cities. So we have Santiago de Cuba, Camagüey, and then the other city is Havana up in the western portion of the map. Then there are also these three smaller circles here. There's one here, here, and then up here, and these are economic centers. So we'll see how those all factor into how the game is played in a minute, but I wanted to first take you through each of the different factions that are in the game, and then explain a little bit more about just the general flow of the game, and then how each of the factions win, and then we can get started. So a little bit of preamble here, but hopefully it makes for a more consistent and smooth playthrough, and you guys are able to follow along. So there are four factions, like I said. The first faction we have here is the government forces. And the government forces are comprised of these darker blue cubes. These are called troops. The lighter colored cubes are called police. And then these discs here are bases. And so those are the three different types of troops available, or forces available to the government player. And they represent just the government of Cuba, before all of the insurrection actually happens and takes place. Then we have the Syndicate player, which the Syndicate is like the mob. They're a corrupt faction that really only cares about money. They have these guerrillas here, and each of the guerrillas in the game come with two sides. So there's this plain side and then like an embossed side. When they're upside down like this, that means that they are underground, or they can't be seen. They're in hiding, basically. And then once they get flipped up, then the government's aware of their location and where they are. Next, they also have these discs, which for the government, these were bases, but for the Syndicate, these represent casinos, and they have as well a plain side and an embossed side. So the embossed side means that the casino is open, and then the regular side means that they are closed down or not operational. And they also interact with these cash markers, which we'll see more what those do later on. So then we have the Directorio. And the Directorio pieces are yellow. They also have guerrillas that have an underground side and an above ground or active side. And then lastly, they have these bases here as well. Then finally, we have the 26th July faction. And this is the faction that we are going to be playing as. And the 26th July faction is actually the faction that Fidel Castro, tried to revolt and and overthrow the government with. So they also have these guerrilla pieces, which can be flipped over, and bases as well. So that's all the different player pieces on the map. We also have a resource track up there, or it's actually a general records track because this tracks toward victory conditions as well. And then we have a sequence of play. This is going to be critical, and this is the common thread that kind of unifies all of the coin games, as well as the deck of cards there. So on the map, there are also these pieces here, which indicate control. So we have syndicate control, government control. There are other ones, 26 July control, or Directorio DR control. What control means in this context is if a player's pieces in a particular region or province outnumber every other faction in that province combined, then they will have control there. So since in Pinar del Rio, then the syndicates have a casino here, but there aren't any other pieces, so they outnumber all the other factions there, so they have control of that faction. Similarly, up here for the government, they have control because their police and their troops added together is 10, and every other faction's pieces only add up to 3. So we have 2 Directorio guerrillas and 1 open casino. So since 10 is more than 3, then government has control there. Yeah, it's pretty easy, and we'll be checking for control a lot during the game, as it's tied directly to some of the victory conditions. Then the second box over here is the support box, and it can be in one of 5 different states. So if nothing's there, then it's neutral. We also have passive support, active support on the other side, passive opposition, and finally active opposition. And different factions are going to want to have different levels of support or opposition to the government based on their own unique victory conditions there. So obviously the government wants to be supported themselves, so they are going to hope to get active support in as many places as they can, whereas someone like the 26th July would want active opposition because they're trying to overthrow the government, so they want they just want to have the regular people oppose the government. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's pretty much everything that's going to be on the map. And again, the cache markers are going to be a little bit unique, but those also end up getting transported onto the map and tied to specific guerrillas or cubes. Then we have the U.S. Alliance box here. This is either in a state of 2, 3, or 4, so it's firm, reluctant, or embargoed. And what this tells you is basically how many resources does it cost for the government to perform operations. So it starts out, it's a little cheaper, and then as time goes on, it might get more expensive for the government to perform some of their operations. Then we have various indicators at the top of the map. All these cylinders, the actual wooden cylinders, are going to represent how many resources each of the factions has at any given time. So the Directorio start out with 5 resources, 26 July starts with 10, and then Syndicate and Government both start at 15. The resource track goes up to 49, so you can get a ton. Then what are these other markers here? Those have to do with the specific victory conditions for each faction. So now might be a good time to at least go through what are these factions even trying to do. The government faction, you can see in the upper right here, it'll tell you how this faction wins. So they want support to be greater than 18 and all cities to be in active support. and that will give them at least a chance to win. There's a question mark there because once you reach your goal, your victory condition, you don't automatically just win. You have to wait for a propaganda card to come up, and that's when all the victory conditions are checked. And if you're winning at that point in time, then you'll win. Otherwise, the game keeps going. In a solo game, actually, the rules are slightly different. You have to make it until the last propaganda card. There's 4 of them in this deck that's kind of pre-seeded. And so, yeah, you need to make it through to the last one and hopefully be winning by a larger margin than any of the other factions. So they want support more than 18 and all cities to be active support. So what does support mean for actual number here? You can see on the support markers, active support has a ×2, passive support has a ×1. You multiply this number, the ×2 or the ×1, by the population of whatever province or city that they're in. So, for example, in La Habana, there's a 1 here, that's the population, and it's getting modified by a ×1 passive support, so that's contributing 1 to the overall support for the government. Up here in Havana, we have a ×2, and this is a population of 6. So together that's 12 total support for the government. So they want 18, and they start out at 16. How did they get that number? So like I said, 12 there. We've got 2 here, 2 × 1. So that's 14, 15, 16, and that's it. Yeah, 16. So that's the total support marker there. You can see on the actual track, there's this dark blue support question mark, and that's saying, okay, well, for support to be greater than 18, it would be at 19 or above. So it's kind of a visual indicator of how close the government faction is to their victory condition. So right now they're 3 away. Furthermore, they have to have active support in each of the cities. So they have active support in Havana, but in Camagüey they only have passive support, and in Santiago de Cuba they are neutral. So they still have a long way to go for their victory condition there. So that's how the government faction is going to try to win, and we'll see how good they do. And then we have the Syndicate. Like I said, these are kind of the mob, so what they care about is money and open casinos. So they might try to bribe the government into keeping their casinos open. It's really cool how it works. But so open casinos, remember the casinos can be closed or open when they're on the map. We can see we'll end up taking from left to right here. So the next casino that goes out is going to be this one. And so there's a number there that on the board, printed on the board, that just gives you a good visual indicator of how many casinos are actually on the map. So they need more than 7 open casinos, and they need their resources to be greater than 30, so 31 or above. So on the map they have 3 casinos, and those are located in Pinar del Rio, La Habana, and Havana. So you can see that their token for open casinos is at 3 because of that. All of those casinos are open. So Syndicate wants money and open casinos. Then we have the Directorio. This is maybe the easiest to understand of the faction, or like, I think as a new player, then the Directorio is one of the easier factions to determine like what actions you should take in order to get closer to your victory condition. So we have population and bases greater than 9. So you add up your population and your bases. The number of bases they have right now out on the board are 0. They haven't put any out. And then their population is going to be similar to support, where we were multiplying the support by the population of the province or city. But it's going to be every place where the Directorio has control, then it's going to contribute toward their victory win. So they control Camagüey, so this is a population 1. So that's 1 closer to their victory condition there. If they had controlled Oriente, for example, that would be plus an extra 2. So their marker up here, population under control plus bases, is going to be at 1, because they just have that 1 province. And then lastly, we have the 26th July. So this is going to be us as players, and the rest are going to be controlled by bots. So they want opposition plus bases, so kind of a hybrid between what the government is after versus what the Directorio is after. So similar to how the government wants support, then the 26th July want opposition. So we can see that in Sierra Maestra, for example, they have a ×2, population's 1, so that's contributing 1 toward their victory condition, and they also have a base right here, so that's another 1, that's 3. We've got passive opposition here, so that's 4, 5. Well, I'm sure I'm missing 1. Oh yeah, Oriente, 6, 7. So ×1, and then there's a 2 there, so 7, and their opposition plus bases marker is at 7. So we'll want to be continually updating that track to make sure that everything is visible to us and we know how close everyone is to winning. There are a couple of extra markers that end up going on the board. There's this insurgent capabilities box. Certain cards have capabilities which are like buffs or debuffs that take effect for the rest of the game. And those have special markers so you can keep track and make sure that you remember to do those. And then also we have these terror markers and sabotage markers. So certain factions like 26th July can terrorize provinces, and we might lay down a terror marker, which makes it more difficult for support or opposition to change. We'll see how it works when the actual gameplay goes, though. And then we have these pawns, and the pawns are going to just be helpful little markers so we can remember where we're doing our actions. So we might do an action in multiple spaces, and just so we don't forget or forget to pay for something, then we can lay those markers down. Great. So what does an actual turn look like? So we have this deck of cards here with a bunch of events. I think there's like 52 cards in there, but I've taken out a few of them, 8 of them, because we're doing the shorter version of the game. But there's still going to be events, and then there's going to be propaganda cards. And we'll see what those look like when we get to them. But pretty typical of most coin games. There's going to be an event that's currently in play, and then you're going to be able to see the event that's kind of on deck, or the next one that's going to get played. So, players can make different plans, I guess, if they want to utilize the event or if they want to wait for the next one, and we'll get to that in just a second. So, these cards, a lot of them are dual use events, which means that they have this top section, which is not shaded, and then this bottom section, which is shaded. Typically, the 26th July and the Directorio want to execute the light shaded region because that's going to be more beneficial for them, and the government and the Syndicate would instead want to utilize this bottom part of the card because it's usually more beneficial for their faction. Then we also have the name of the card, some art, and then the top is kind of the most important part, or one of the most important pieces. This has the different factions listed out, or their symbols, in initiative order for the card. So the first faction that gets to act on this card is going to be the 26th July, that's us, then the government, and then Syndicate and Directorio. Only 2 different factions can actually act on a given turn, and we'll see why that is in a sec. But so if I chose to pass, for example, then the government would get a chance to execute this card, and the Syndicate, but the Directorio would have to wait because only 2 factions can actually take an action. Then we also have on deck Guantanamo Bay, and this one has another tidbit of information here that says this is an insurgent capability, so we'd fish around in that bowl for the Guantanamo Bay one, and this would be a permanent ability for the 26th July for the rest of the game. So if I took this event, then 26th July can kidnap in Sierra Maestra as if it was a city for the rest of the game. And then alternatively, government momentum means that this power would be in effect until the next propaganda round. So let's get to the heart of the coin game. I know I've been explaining like how to play for 20 minutes and we haven't even gotten into actually playing, but I think it's good to have a good foundation, especially if you haven't played one of these before. There's a lot going on, so yeah, I just think it's good to see it at a slower pace than some of the other stuff out there. So we have a legend here that talks about, you know, the different colored spaces might be forest or grassland or mountain. Here's the city, you know, there's controlled economic centers, there's towns, there's boundaries. Anyway, this is like what makes a coin game so great, in my opinion, is this. So as we saw on the card, for this particular card, the 26th July, or us, we're first up. We get to decide what we want to do. So we have 3 different options. Well, really 4 different options. We can take an operation only with no special activity. We can take an operation with a special activity, or we can do the event, or we can pass. So what is this operation and special activity stuff? Well, the game comes with these awesome foldouts here. And gosh, let me set this down. So you can see they have all the different factions, and what these have on them. We'll go to the 26th July because that's who we are. You have these 4 different operations that you can do on the left. So we can choose to rally, we can choose to march, we can choose to attack, or we can choose to do terror. And then we have special abilities or special activities over here. We have infiltrate, ambush, or kidnap. And so going back to this, if we chose to do operation only, no special activity, then we would be choosing from one of these 4 actions. And we can do that in multiple spaces. So like for terror, we just need to spend 1 resource per city or province selected. But we can do it in as many cities or provinces that have underground guerrillas. So we might be doing a bunch of stuff, or maybe not a lot of stuff, but we're selecting from these 4 buckets of actions. And each faction has a different set of these. So rally, march, attack, and terror, the Directorio is the same. The way they actually work is slightly different. But then we have like rally, march, construct, and terror. And then the government has like totally different stuff. They have train, garrison, sweep, and assault. Okay, so that's if we wanted to do no special activity. If we wanted to do a special activity, then say the government wanted to do a special activity, they have these little prerequisite kind of boxes here, which say that in order for you to do, so if you did a garrison, you can choose from any special activity on the right here that you want to do. But if you did train, the only special activity you could do would be transport. Looks like they're pretty open. But like here, if I rally, I can only infiltrate. If I march, I can only infiltrate. If I attack, I can only ambush. If I do terror, I can only kidnap. And some of these have a maximum number of spaces, etc. So you might be thinking to yourself, why the heck would you ever want to do just an operation and not a special activity? Well, if I go up here, then the next eligible faction is locked in. They can either pass or they have to go in to this spot up here, which is a lim op, which is the same as an operation, no special activity, but they can only do it in one location. So they can't do it like we did it, where we can just kind of go anywhere. So if I really want to, make sure that another faction doesn't play an event because it's particularly bad for me, I might go up here. If I do an event with special activity, then the second eligible faction has a choice. They can either do a limited operation, again, that's only one location, or they can execute the event text. And then lastly, I can choose to do the event. Well, second to lastly, because lastly I can pass and just get some resources. I can do the event, and if I do the event, then the second eligible faction can do a full operation with special activity. So you really only want to be taking events if it's really good for you, if it's better for you, because then the second eligible faction can do a bunch of extra stuff potentially. So suppose I did do the event, then the second eligible faction would be the government in this case. So they could either pass or they can do a excuse me. They can do a event operation with special activity, sorry. And then the card is done. We would pull this card that was on deck and put it down here to say this one's now in play, and then we'd flip over the next card so you could sort of see what's coming. Then both of these markers would go over to the ineligible factions box, and the next one would come up, and really only the Syndicate and the Directorio would be able to act. So on this card, the government's first eligible, but they're ineligible, so it would skip to the next one. 26 July, also ineligible, so it'd skip to a Directorio, and they would be the first to act on this card, and they could choose to do, one of these two things. If you choose to pass, then you remain eligible, so you're not going to go into this box. So say the Directorio passed, and then the Syndicate did limited, or they're going to do a operation with special activity, because why not? Then once that card is done, then what we're going to do is move both of these back over to the eligible factions box. Directorio passed, so they're going to go back up to eligible, and then the Syndicate's going to be the one that's ineligible at that point. So there's this kind of push and pull. You're always jockeying for position. You want to make sure that you're always eligible when events come up that are either really good or really bad for you, so you can take control of the situation and make sure that those things either do or don't happen to you. There's one other type of card in here, and that's propaganda card. It's a big old brown card, and it's when that becomes in play, we're going to go through all these extra steps here. So we're going to check, did anyone win the game? Then we're going to add some resources to everybody based on some various factors. Then we're going to modify the support that's already on the board. The government's going to redeploy some of their troops from, provinces out in the countryside back into the cities. And then lastly, we're going to reset. All the terror markers are going to go away. All the casinos are going to be changed to open, I believe. Eligibility is going to get reset. Everyone's going to be in the same state as right now. And then you move on. In the 4-player game, if anyone won in the first box here, the game's over. But I think, like I mentioned before, we actually have to make it until the last propaganda card before we're able to win. However, if one of the bots fulfills their victory condition and it's not the last card, they'll still win. So it's kind of a balancing mechanism there. Okay, so I think that's basically it. We're going to go through just really quick what each of our operations do, and then we should be ready to actually start playing. So I'm not going to worry too much about the special activities yet. We'll look into these more once we start doing them. But rallying, the purpose of these, we're going to augment or recover friendly forces. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be placing guerrillas from our available forces onto the map in certain locations. Or if there's enough of them there, we're going to be able to replace 2 of the guerrillas on the map with a base. So we can either have, we can start throwing out guerrillas onto the map, or we can replace 2 existing ones with a base, which we want to do because that's part of our victory condition. Each province has a cap of 2 bases that can be there, and 2 casinos. So you can have 2 bases. It could be 1 26th July base, 1 Directorio base, or 2 government bases. I mean, it's not limited by who controls them. It's just 2 overall flat. But the Syndicate also gets an extra to put their casinos in. Okay, so usually it's just placing 1 piece out here, but if there's a base there, so like in Sierra Maestra, then we actually get to do twice the population plus twice the bases. So if we were to rally here, we'd get a 2 plus there's 1 base, so twice the bases is 2 there. We'd actually get to put 4 guys out instead of just 1. So that's, you want to lay down those bases so you can also get troops on the board quickly, or guerrillas on the board. I shouldn't say troops because that's what the government have. Marching, pretty straightforward. Oh yeah, and the cost of this is 1 resource per selected space, and we can only do this in provinces or cities, but they can't have any support. So we couldn't do it in Camagüey. We could do it in Santiago de Cuba because there's no support. We can do it here. There's plenty of places for us. Then we have March. This can be any space, and all it is it costs a resource per destination, but we're moving guerrillas into adjacent spaces. And that includes moving from a province to an economic center or from a province to a city. And it should be fairly obvious which provinces are adjacent to each other. Like these 2 are adjacent, but this is not adjacent to this. And that's how marches are going to work. And if we're moving in and there's a bunch of guys already there, we have to flip our guerrillas to active rather than them being underground. So it's like if we're sending in just tons of forces, the government's going to notice that we're there. Then there's going to be attacking. For this, we're going to activate everyone in the space, and we're going to roll a die. Each faction has a 6-sided die, and as long as we under-roll the number of guerrillas there, so if we had 4 guerrillas in a space, we would need to roll a 4 or less. Then we can take away enemy pieces. And then, so that's how, if we're wanting to get control of a space, or, maybe the government is just they're too concentrated in one area, we want to take them out, then that's how we're going to do that. Lastly, there's terror, and this is going to be important because, well, 1, kidnap is a really great special ability for the 26th July, but and it's the only operation that has kidnap as its special ability or special activity that it can do. But for 1 resource in any city with underground guerrillas, we are going to put a terror marker down, which again, all those do is make it more difficult for government to buy back support. And we're going to shift the opposition 1 level toward active opposition. So if it's passive support, we would make it neutral. That's 1 step in the direction of active opposition. If it's passive opposition, we'd flip it over to active opposition. And we can do this in economic centers too. If we do that, we're going to be placing a sabotage marker. And so the economic centers, the government is going to get resources during the propaganda round for any economic centers that aren't sabotaged. So they're going to get 2 from this one, or they'll get 3 from that one. So it's a good idea to kind of kneecap the government resource train by sabotaging those economic centers. Okay, I'm not going to go through all the various factions operations because we will do that as we go. But the last thing I want to do is just look at an example of this flowchart, which there's a bunch of if-then statements to determine what the non-players are going to do. Most of the time they're going to do the event, so thankfully that's a little bit less complicated than just looking at this thing. But we are going to go through that, and it's going to be wonderful. I think with that, that's all we need to get started here. So I think I'm going to wrap this video up because it's a little over half an hour. And we're going to start video 2, where we're actually going to start playing this thing. Hooray! So I have to think about whether we want to take this event or not. And I got to go eat dinner. But it's been great. So hopefully this has been at least somewhat interesting or valuable. And I will see you all next time on Cuba Libre.